president's going to issue a 24-hour warning to the Iranians that they have 24 hours to demonstrate that they're willing to meet these conditions of relinquishing the military dimensions of the nuclear program, relinquishing the missiles, etc. They probably will not meet that deadline. I mean, maybe they will, and then we'll go down a path of negotiation. If they don't, I think you will see the president take an action.
Hello and welcome to the Middle East Report, your one-stop shop for all the news and analysis coming out of the region, and I'm your host, Ali Raza Manji. Now, in the last 24 hours, President Trump has threatened Iran once again. He said that he's sending his military response in the form of the aircraft carrier Abraham Lincoln. It's heading to the region, and he says it's time for Iran to come to the table and get a deal done. So, what can happen now? Let's speak to Victoria Coates. She was the National Security Adviser in the last Trump administration, the deputy, and she focused specifically on the Middle East, and she joins us now. Thanks for joining us, Victoria.
Otherwise, it's good to be with you.
I wanted to ask, first of all, what does it mean that the aircraft carrier is now heading to the region? What does that tell us?
That tells us a lot. The Abraham Lincoln is actually in the CENTCOM area of responsibility. It's there. It has arrived. And an aircraft carrier is 4.5 square acres of essentially sovereign U.S. territory, wherever you want to put it. And then it comes with about 5,000, a little bit more sailors. So there are a lot of people, a lot of airplanes, and a lot of attendant vessels. So we have things, the Burley class destroyers, which have Aegis missile defense systems on them, so sea-based missile defense. It's just a massive show of force. It's not just one craft. It's a group. And so this is what was so powerful against the Iranians during the 12-day war and the other engagements with Israel. So it's a real signal to the regime in Tehran that the president is serious.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about that actually, because last time the big thing that I think shocked a lot of people was the use of the B-2 bomber, the stealth aircraft. I mean, is that something the president will look at using again, or was that sort of, given the circumstances and the shock it provided, I mean, obviously doing like a full-on rotation effectively to make that attack work, would it be a different approach this time, do you think?
Well, it depends on the mission. So you use the B-2s if you're trying to take out a massive target. So it's a lot of ordnance that you're dropping. If they're doing something much more specific, if you're doing a targeted assassination, like the Soleimani raid, for example, did not require a B-2. If you're potentially going after something like Karg Island, their oil export facilities, you might need a B-2 depending on what you're trying to take out. But again, it depends on the mission.
Yeah, so let's focus on this particular one then. So Donald Trump is inherently unpredictable, and I think that makes him difficult for his allies and difficult for his enemies as well. So in this situation, is regime change really the aim? Because the Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has said very clearly that he would respond and he would trigger a response if something was to happen.
Well, Araghchi is talking a tough game, but the fact of the matter is they know they're essentially powerless against both the Israelis and the Americans. That was demonstrated during the 12-day war. Their air defenses or missile defenses were worthless, and at the end of the game, they could basically put together a show strike on Qatar, of all places, which did little or no damage. So, that's what he says. You're correct about the president's unpredictability. As a policymaker, we found that extremely useful. Because nobody in the region knew exactly what he was going to do. And he's demonstrated in the second term that he is willing to use the exquisite capabilities of the United States military, be it in Operation Midnight Hammer, as we've just discussed, or in the operation to extract Nicolas Maduro from Venezuela. Nobody thought he could do that. Nobody thought he would do that, but he did. And so, that has to be also a very strong warning to the regime in Tehran.
So let's take the specific case. Say he wants to go for regime change this time. The big issue is that you can't bomb a country into regime change. Now, that feels like a fairly logical conclusion to draw. So how does President Trump, and he has promised a lot of the Iranian people saying the help is coming. So how does he do that?
Well, he has already been quite supportive of the Iranian people, both through the action in June, which demonstrated sort of the fecklessness of the regime, that they weren't 100 feet tall or inevitable. I think that's what started to encourage these protests, which have been on sort of a slow burn due to the economic mismanagement. But the president's been clear. U.S. imposed regime change is not his errand here. His errand has been the nuclear program and the missiles. And so the things that directly threaten the United States are what are in the vital national security interests of the United States. And I think this administration has learned the very difficult lessons of Iraq and Afghanistan, that trying to impose a liberal democracy on a country externally is a very, very difficult task. And I think that is what is laying out their path in Venezuela. A lot of people would like to see regime change in Venezuela, would like to see Maria Corina Machado, who we were very pleased to welcome to the Heritage Foundation 2 weeks ago. She's a wonderful opposition leader. But the president didn't do that. He wants to keep the institutions in Venezuela in place, keep the government functioning, and then in an orderly fashion go about elections and potentially a new president. I think you'll see something similar in Iran if that's what happens, rather than saying we are going in to topple this government and install a new one. He's going to say, I'm going in to get rid of the nuclear program and the missiles that threaten Israel and the United States, and then it's for the people of Iran to decide.
That's interesting because it's sort of a change of approach from previous US administrations, which have explicitly looked to topple the regime in Iran. So President Trump has said that he wants to negotiate. The Iranians have actually made clear that they are happy to negotiate on this. But he did rip up the previous deal, the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, which was negotiated by President Obama. So what difference would this deal be? Because they were both deals to take away Iran's nuclear capabilities.
Well, the difference would be the JCPOA did no such thing. It essentially enshrined Iran's so-called right to enrich, preserved their nuclear program, did nothing about the missiles, did nothing about the terrorist proxies, and had a deadline that has passed. It passed in 2025. I mean, that deal, whether the president ceased compliance with it or not, is over. There is no more JCPOA, and it was utterly ineffective. So I think the notion that it's the options or nuclear war or the JCPOA, that was an Obama era fiction. So I think what the president would insist on would be full compliance with the IAEA, with full revelation of what their actual program is. We know because of the revelation of their nuclear archives that the Israelis revealed in 2018, we know the JCPOA was fraudulently negotiated, that they had plans for a nuclear weapon that they kept, and they kept them secret. They kept insisting there was no military dimension to their program. Well, guess what? There is. So that all needs to be revealed. It needs to be dismantled. They need to get rid of the vast majority, if not all, of these offensive missiles pointed at Israel that it can also reach Europe, by the way. So that's a problem for Europe as well. Get rid of all of those and stop the incitement of terrorist violence throughout the Middle East and beyond. So that those would be the very simple conditions. If they meet those conditions, I'm not hopeful, but they might. If they do that because they know they can't solve their economic problems, I mean, the sky's the limit for Iran. They have the world's third largest proven oil reserves on the planet, and they should be prosperous. They should be a successful country.
So in reality, it would basically be get rid of a lot of the attacking capabilities you have, and that would be in return for a removal of sanctions, effectively. I mean, that's sort of the baseline construct of a deal here in some ways, isn't it?
Essentially, yeah.
Yeah. So let's look at a bit more strategically then. Why is Iran so strategically important to the region? I mean, I ask because even in more modern times, like 1953 onwards, we've had a CIA MI6 coup which sort of toppled Mossadegh, the prime minister then, and that kind of sort of has seen a spurring of events since. So can you explain, like, to our listeners and our audience why Iran is so strategically important?
Well, I might push back on that a little bit. I mean, the whole CIA coup narrative has been largely debunked. That it was much more of an internal
But they
Iranian
were supported by the
situation.
CIA. But on a wide.
Well, I mean, we can debate that, but I mean, the importance of Iran is geographic. You look at a map; it's very centrally located in the Middle East. It's oil. They have, as I said, the third largest proven oil reserves, massive natural gas reserves, which they share with Qatar, which Iran really hasn't developed yet, but that's a very significant asset that they have. And then they essentially control the Strait of Hormuz, that choke point at the mouth of the Persian Gulf. And about a quarter of the world's oil supply goes in and out of the Strait of Hormuz, or out rather, every day. And so if the Iranians were to close the Strait of Hormuz through mines or other means, you're going to have a massive disruption to global oil markets, and that's going to have a very, very bad economic effect writ large. Now, that is something the United States increasingly can mitigate. It's hard for us to work with our usual partner, Saudi Arabia, because Saudi is dependent on the strait to get their oil, the vast majority of their oil, out to the world. But the United States can produce more, Norway can produce more, Canada can produce more, and now Venezuela can produce a whole lot more oil and get it onto the normal markets rather than the black market. So that's why Iran is critically important, and why it would be such a great strategic bonus to the United States, but to everyone, if they stopped being such a violent, disruptive basket case of a country and became a prosperous, secure nation.
Yeah, and that kind of takes us to what they've been doing in the last sort of 20 to 30 years, right? Because what Iran calls itself, it calls the axis of resistance. Now, that feels like it's been diminished over the last few years, and that feels like at this point has led the Iranian regime to the weakest it's really ever been. Is that a fair assessment?
It is, and I think the component here that's different from, say, 2009 or 2022 is this is not one episode. This isn't a stolen election or the murder of a young woman, as egregious as those two things were that sparked those previous rounds of protests. This is systemic, catastrophic economic failure that they can't fix. Earlier this week, the banking system went to the Central Bank of Iran and said, we need 5.6 quadrillion with a Q real to remain solvent. The central bank agreed to print 2 trillion, quadrillion real. I mean, I don't even know how many go into a quadrillion, but if that's what you're printing to try to keep your economy afloat, I mean, the problems can't be fixed. They're going to need an entire new currency system. They're going to need a new financial transaction system. They're going to need a modern treasury, and they're going to need to start investing in their country. All of the money that comes in, again, lots of revenue goes into Iran from oil sales, and they should have other industry as well. They should be a going concern, but they've put all of that into these terrorist proxies. They've poured it into the nuclear program. They've poured it into the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. All of these very negative, hostile elements of the government that do nothing to feed the people or build prosperity. So they can repress their way out of this. Reports are that on the 8th, 9th of January, they murdered in cold blood more than 10,000 people, some estimates as high as 30,000. It dwarfs what they've done in the past. It shows you how desperate they are. But that's not going to solve this problem ultimately. So we'll see what happens. But that's what's different this time, is the degree to which they can't resolve the issues that are causing the uprisings.
Yeah, and that kind of brings me to the final question, really, is that what are we expecting that might happen now? Obviously, I think there's a likelihood that there is a deal done. There's a likelihood even of a negotiation, I think, in reality. Um, what happens now, in your view?
Well, there are a couple of different paths. I mean, the reporting in Washington today is that the president's going to issue a 24-hour warning to the Iranians that they have 24 hours to demonstrate that they're willing to meet these conditions of relinquishing the military dimensions of the nuclear program, relinquishing the missiles, etc. They probably will not meet that deadline. I mean, maybe they will, and then we'll go down a path of negotiation. If they don't, I think you will see the president take an action. I mean, there's a lot of hardware in the region. We also are seeing some offensive aircraft from the United Kingdom moving into Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar. So our allies are in position as well. Obviously, the Israeli security chief was is in Washington today and tomorrow, along with the Saudi defense minister. So there a lot of pieces are moving around on the board that would make a strike possible over the weekend. We'll see what the president would elect to do. As I said before, I would see either targeting the people who carried out the massacre or targeting the oil export facilities as the most likely path.
Victoria Coates, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Alariza. Good to see you.